480 pounds, 6 feet 4 inches, 11 years without a loss. They called him Big Bull Bronson, and on the night of February the 9th, 1971, he was the most feared heavyweight wrestling champion in North America. 312 professional matches, 312 victories, 41 men carried out of the ring on a stretcher, 2 who never wrestled again, 1 who lost the use of his left arm for the rest of his life. Big Bull Bronson did not lose. Big Bull Bronson did not draw. Big Bull Bronson finished his opponents inside 4 minutes every single time for over a decade. And on that Tuesday night, in a television studio on Walnut Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in front of a live studio audience of 112 people and a national broadcast reaching more than 31 million American homes, Big Bull Bronson did something no man had ever done before on live television. He looked at a small Chinese martial artist sitting 3 feet from him, leaned forward in his chair, and spat directly into his face. The studio went dead silent. The host froze mid-sentence. A cameraman named Frank Petrillo, working camera 2, would later say the temperature in the studio dropped 10 degrees in 3 seconds. What Big Bull Bronson did not know, what the 31 million Americans watching their black and white television sets did not know, what the producer in the booth screaming into his headset did not know, was that the man whose face he had just spat on had already counted 6 things. The angle of Bronson's shoulders, the position of his right hand, the distance between his chair and the small wooden coffee table in the center of the set, the exact location of the studio's emergency exit, the number of seconds it would take a man weighing 480 pounds to rise from a low-set armchair, and the precise inch on Big Bull Bronson's massive body where Bruce Lee would, in 6 seconds, place a single open palm and end an 11-year reign of terror without throwing one punch. But what Bruce did not know yet was that the camera was still rolling. It was a Tuesday. The day of the week matters because Tuesdays were the lowest-rated taping night of the week for the Mike Douglas show, which is why the producers had booked Big Bull Bronson and his manager Carl Renzo for the 4:30 afternoon segment that aired live at 6:30 Eastern Time. Mike Douglas needed ratings. Carl Renzo wanted publicity for the upcoming title defense at the Spectrum on March the 20th. The wrestling promoter was paying for 2 segments and a 20-second spot. The booking had been confirmed on the 17th of January. Nobody at the network knew that on the same Tuesday, Mike Douglas had also booked, as a co-host segment, a 30-year-old Chinese-American actor and martial arts teacher who had just finished filming the pilot of a television series called The Warrior in Hollywood. The Warrior would never air. The pilot would be shelved. The actor's name was Bruce Lee. The studio sat at 455 Walnut Street, 2 blocks from Independence Hall. The building had been a furniture warehouse before the network bought it in 1965. The walls were painted institutional green. The studio smelled on that February afternoon of 3 things: stale cigarette smoke from the morning's audience, aqua velva aftershave from the host, and the heavy, sour animal smell of Big Bull Bronson, who had been sweating into the same wool dress shirt since his 5-hour drive down from Pittsburgh that morning. The lights overhead, 400 tungsten bulbs at 2,500 watts apiece, made the small set hot enough that the makeup girl, a 22-year-old named Donna Mancuso, had to come out 3 separate times before the taping to powder Mike Douglas's forehead. Donna had been working the show for 14 months. She had powdered the forehead of Bobby Kennedy. She had powdered the forehead of Sammy Davis Jr. She had been told by her supervisor that the Tuesday taping would be routine. None of them knew what was about to happen on that little green-walled stage with the orange shag carpet and the naugahyde armchairs. To understand what was coming, you have to understand who Big Bull Bronson was. He had been born Mikhail Brunovich in a coal town in West Virginia, the son of a Slovak miner and a Welsh schoolteacher. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed 480 pounds at the official weigh-in at the Spectrum on January the 12th, 1971. But Carl Renzo had told reporters off the record that the real number, the morning of match number, was closer to 496. His chest measured 64 inches around. His neck was 22 inches. His hands, and this is the detail every wrestler who ever fought him remembered, his hands were the size of cast-iron skillets. The trainer who taped Bronson's wrists before matches, a man named Reggie Daltrey, who had been wrapping fighters since 1948, said that Bronson's right hand could not fit inside a regulation boxing glove. He had to wear a custom-made size 18. When he walked, he did not stride. He rolled, the weight shifting forward and back, his right foot dragging slightly because of an old injury to his right hip socket that had never properly healed. You could hear him coming down a hallway from 40 feet away. The wooden floors of the Walnut Street studio creaked under him as he walked from the green room to the set, and that creaking sound, 3 quick groans of stressed pine, was the first thing the audience heard before they saw him. His professional record was the stuff of nightmares. 312 matches, 312 wins. 290 of those wins came inside 3 minutes. The longest match of Bronson's career had lasted 7 minutes and 41 seconds against a Canadian heavyweight named Jacques Verdier in Montreal in 1968. Verdier had never wrestled again. He retired 3 months later at the age of 29 and opened a hardware store outside Quebec City. When a reporter asked Verdier in 1973 why he had quit so young, Verdier looked at the reporter for a long moment and said, in heavily accented English, "Some things you don't come back from." 2 of Bronson's opponents had ended their careers in wheelchairs. One had died on the table at Mercy Hospital in Pittsburgh, 6 hours after a match in 1966, from a complication the coroner listed as blunt force trauma to the abdomen consistent with extreme compressive force. The Wrestling Commission had investigated. Bronson had been cleared. The story had been buried. But the men who wrestled in his weight class knew. The producers of the Mike Douglas show had not booked Big Bull Bronson for a wrestling match. They had booked him for a chair-breaking demonstration. Wrestling promoters in 1971 sold their fighters by spectacle. Carl Renzo had explained the bit to the segment producer, a man named Eddie Sokoloff, 3 weeks earlier. Bronson would walk out, sit in the armchair, charm Mike for 2 minutes, then stand up, lift a standard wooden folding chair, and crush it in one hand. The studio crew had pre-selected 3 identical folding chairs from a church supply company in Bensalem. Eddie Sokoloff had personally tested them by sitting on them. They were sturdy. They were not weakened. They were not props. When the cameras went live at 6:32 Eastern, Mike Douglas introduced Big Bull Bronson, and the 480-pound man walked out, took the folding chair from the production assistant, a 20-year-old named Anthony Caruso, who would later tell his grandchildren about that night for the rest of his life, and Bronson closed his right fist around the back of the chair. He did not break it. He pulverized it. The chair did not crack. It compressed. The wood folded inward like wet cardboard. The metal legs bent into a knot. Anthony Caruso said afterward that the sound was not a snap. It was a long, low groan, like a tree dying in slow motion. The audience did not applaud. They did not breathe. A woman in the 3rd row, later identified as a 58-year-old schoolteacher from Cherry Hill named Eleanor Bishop, made a small sound in her throat and turned her face away. The cameraman zoomed in on Bronson's hand still holding the destroyed chair, and Bronson smiled at the camera. His teeth were yellow. His smile did not reach his eyes. Mike Douglas, a professional broadcaster for 19 years who had interviewed presidents and movie stars, sat in his armchair with his mouth slightly open and said the only thing his trained mind could produce. "Well, that's something." 3 feet to Mike's right, in the 3rd guest chair, the smaller Naugahyde one that the show used for co-hosts and second guests, sat a small man in a dark blue suit jacket with a black turtleneck underneath. He had been introduced 4 minutes earlier as Bruce Lee, the star of an upcoming television show. He had said almost nothing during his introduction. He had simply sat. His hands were folded in his lap. His back was straight. His feet were flat on the orange shag carpet. His chest rose and fell at 12 breaths per minute. While the audience gasped at the destroyed chair, Bruce Lee did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He looked, in fact, the way a chess player looks when his opponent makes a predictable opening move. A floor manager named Patrick Whelan, 26 years old, 3 years out of Penn State, would later say that watching Bruce Lee during the chair demonstration was like watching a man read a book in a thunderstorm. The thunder did not seem to reach him. What the audience did not know, what Mike Douglas did not know, what Big Bull Bronson certainly did not know, was that earlier that morning, in the small green room down the hallway from the studio, Bruce Lee had received a folded piece of paper from his student, James DeMille. James was 30 years old, a former boxer from Seattle, and he had been training with Bruce since 1964. James had been at the studio since 7 that morning. He had watched Carl Renzo and Big Bull Bronson arrive at 10. He had watched the demonstration rehearsal at noon. He had heard Carl Renzo, in a hallway, tell a network executive a story that James was now writing on a piece of paper for Bruce to read. The story was about what Big Bull Bronson had done in Memphis 4 months earlier, after a match, to a young black wrestler named Marcus Walls, who had refused to throw the fight. Marcus Walls had spent 11 weeks in a hospital. Marcus Walls had not pressed charges. Marcus Walls had been 24 years old. Bruce Lee read the note. He folded it carefully. He put it in his inside jacket pocket. He looked up at James and asked one question. How does he hold his weight? James thought for a moment. Forward, James said. His weight is always forward. He's a charger. He likes to fall into people. Bruce was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, A 480-pound man whose weight is forward has roughly a 60-degree window of correction. If he commits, he cannot recover in under 1.5 seconds. James felt something cold move down his spine. He had heard that tone in Bruce's voice before. He had heard it in 1967 in a backstage hallway in Long Beach. He had heard it once in a parking lot in Oakland in 1964. It was not anger. It was the sound of a problem being solved. The crowd outside the green room had been growing all afternoon. Word had traveled, the way word travels in television studios, that something interesting was going to happen on the Mike Douglas taping. There were 11 people standing in the hallway outside the studio at 5 p.m. By 6 p.m., there were 34. By 6:15, the building's security officer, a 61-year-old retired Philadelphia patrolman named Walter Brennan, badge number 5438, had been called from the lobby to manage the hallway. Walter had worked the night shift at Mike Douglas tapings for 2 years. He had seen drunk celebrities. He had seen brawls in the parking lot. He had watched Tiny Tim cry in the makeup chair. None of that had prepared him for what he would see at 6:36 p.m. that evening when he walked into the back of the studio just in time to watch a small Asian man sit perfectly still while a man more than 3 times his size leaned across a coffee table and spat in his face. Walter would say in an interview 31 years later that the moment Big Bull Bronson spat, Walter's right hand went to his belt where his service revolver used to be. It was not there. He had been retired for 11 months, but his hand went there anyway, because Walter Brennan, 61 years old with 19 years on the force, recognized in that 1 second the way old cops recognize these things, that someone in that studio was about to get killed. Mike Douglas tried to recover the segment. He was a professional. He had to keep talking. He turned to Bruce Lee, smiled the practiced television smile, and said, "Bruce, you've trained in the martial arts your whole life. What did you think of that?" The cameras pushed in on Bruce. He sat exactly as he had been sitting. His hands were folded. His feet were flat. His shoulders were relaxed. He did not look at the destroyed chair. He looked at Big Bull Bronson, and he said one sentence in a voice so quiet that the boom microphone operator had to inch the boom 3 feet closer to pick it up. "A man who breaks a chair, Bruce said. It does not tell you what he can do to a man who is not a chair." The audience did not laugh. They did not applaud. A network technician in the control booth, a man named Sal DeMarco, who had been operating audio mixing boards since 1953, reached up and adjusted his levels because he was certain his equipment had distorted. It had not. The room had simply gone quiet enough that a small voice could be heard from 40 feet away. Big Bull Bronson stopped smiling. His head turned slowly toward Bruce, the way a bull's head turns toward a sound it does not recognize. Carl Renzo, sitting just off camera in a folding chair, leaned forward and put his hand on his knee. He had been managing Bronson for 9 years. He knew the tells. The head turn was a tell. What happened next is preserved on a single piece of magnetic videotape stored in a metal vault in a building outside Wilmington, Delaware. The footage has been copied and circulated thousands of times. The audio is clean. The image is clear. There is no doubt about what happened. Bronson stood up. The folding chair he had been sitting in compressed an inch as his weight shifted off it. He took 2 steps to his right around the small wooden coffee table. He stopped roughly 3 feet from Bruce Lee's chair. He looked down. From Bruce's seated position, Bronson's face was 6 feet above the carpet. Bronson said, in a voice that the microphones picked up at -3 decibels, loud enough to be heard in every American living room with a television set, "Stand up, little man. Stand up and say that again." Bruce did not stand up. He looked up at Bronson the way a man looks up at a thundercloud he has already calculated will not rain on him. He said nothing. He did not move. His heart rate had not increased. His breathing had not changed. Carl Renzo would later swear under oath, in a deposition for an entirely unrelated lawsuit, that Bruce Lee in that moment did not appear to be a human being. He appeared, Carl said, to be a clock that had simply paused. Bronson did not understand stillness. Bronson understood charging, grabbing, lifting, crushing, dropping. Stillness was, to Big Bull Bronson, a kind of insult. He took one more step forward. He leaned down. His face came within 18 inches of Bruce's face. His sour breath, garlic and tobacco and the cheap rye whiskey he had drunk in the green room hit Bruce's cheek. The audience held its collective breath. A woman in the second row, a 44-year-old housewife from Camden named Geraldine Foster, would later tell a reporter that she had reached over and grabbed her husband's wrist so hard she left a bruise. And then Big Bull Bronson did the thing that the 31 million Americans watching their televisions would remember for the rest of their lives. He pursed his lips, he leaned in, and he spat into Bruce Lee's face. The spit struck Bruce on his right cheekbone just below the eye. It rolled down to the corner of his mouth. Mike Douglas stood up. The audience gasped. Donna Mancuso, watching from the wings, said the word "oh" out loud. The producer in the booth, Eddie Sokoloff, slammed his hand on the console and shouted into his headset, "Go to commercial! Go to commercial!" The director said, "We can't. We're live. We're live coast to coast." The booth went silent, and on the set, Bruce Lee did not move. He did not raise his hand to wipe his cheek. He did not stand up. He did not look angry. He looked for 1 full second the way a doctor looks at a patient who has just confirmed a diagnosis. Then Bruce Lee said one sentence, quietly, conversationally, the way you might comment on the weather. 6 seconds is a long time, he said. Inside Bruce Lee's mind, in the 1.5 seconds between the spit landing on his cheek and Big Bull Bronson straightening up, a calculation took place that no human nervous system should be capable of performing. He saw the man in front of him not as a man, but as a system. A 480-pound system with 11 structural weaknesses he had already mapped. The right hip socket, which dragged when Bronson walked, told Bruce the joint capsule was loose. A loose hip joint cannot absorb a sudden lateral force. The pattern of breathing, 6 breaths per minute through the mouth, told Bruce that Bronson's diaphragm was not engaging properly because of the weight pressing down on his abdominal cavity. A man who breathes through his mouth cannot tighten his core in under 0.3 of a second. The angle of Bronson's shoulders, slightly rounded forward, told Bruce that his pectoral muscles had overdeveloped and his upper back had weakened. A forward-shouldered man has compromised balance when struck on the sternum. The position of Bronson's feet, both flat, weight evenly distributed, no preparatory shift, told Bruce that Bronson had not expected resistance, and would need a minimum of 7/10 of a second to brace. Bruce counted the targets. The vagus nerve at the left side of the neck, the carotid sinus on the right, the brachial plexus at the shoulder, the xiphoid process at the base of the sternum, the solar plexus, the floating ribs on either side, the hip socket itself. 11 points. He needed only one. He chose the one that would end the encounter without injury. He chose the carotid sinus. A precise touch, applied at 14 ounces of pressure for 1/4 of a second, would drop Big Bull Bronson's blood pressure by 30 points in less than 2 seconds. He would not fall. He would not be hurt. He would simply, for one moment, lose the ability to stand. And in that moment, on live television, before 31 million Americans, Big Bull Bronson would understand what he had done. Bruce Lee makes a calculation that will define the next 6 seconds of his life and the next 11 years of Big Bull Bronson's. Second 1. Bronson straightens up from his lean. His weight shifts back onto his heels by approximately 4 inches. His hands return to his sides. He is smiling now, the same yellow smile he had given the camera after the chair. He waits for Bruce to react. He expects rage. He expects Bruce to leap from the chair, swing, swear, weep. He has done this before in bars in Pittsburgh and locker rooms in Cleveland. The spit is a test. The reaction tells him what kind of opponent he has. He is waiting for the reaction. Second 2. Bruce Lee stands up. He does not stand the way a man stands when he is preparing to fight. He stands the way a man stands when he is preparing to leave a restaurant. His knees bend. His weight transfers forward. He rises in one smooth motion, no shifting, no bracing, no telegraph. He is now 5 feet 7 inches tall, 138 pounds, standing 18 inches from a 480-pound man. The size disparity is so absurd that a member of the studio audience, a Korean War veteran named Joseph Halloran, laughed out loud. A small, involuntary, nervous laugh. He would say later he did not know he had laughed until he saw the playback. Second 3. Bronson reacts. He sees Bruce rising. He believes Bruce is going to swing. He raises his right arm to grab. The arm comes up at the speed a 480-pound man's arm comes up, which is to say slower than a normal man's arm. The arm rises in an arc, palm open, fingers spread, aiming for Bruce's collar. Bronson has done this 312 times. He always grabs the collar. He always lifts the man. The man's feet leave the ground. The man cannot breathe. The match is over. This is the script. Second 4. Bruce does the thing no one has ever seen. He steps inside. Not back, not away. Forward. His right foot plants between Bronson's massive feet. He is now so close to Bronson that Bronson's open right hand passes over Bruce's shoulder and grabs nothing but air behind him. Bronson's body is committed. His 480 pounds of forward momentum has nowhere to go. He has reached for a man who is no longer in front of him, but underneath him, inside his arc, where his strength cannot reach. The carotid sinus on the right side of Bronson's neck is now exactly 6 inches from Bruce Lee's left hand. Second 5. Bruce's left hand rises. It does not strike. It does not punch. The fingers do not curl into a fist. The hand rises with the soft, certain motion of a man placing an envelope on a desk. 2 fingers, the index and the middle, touch Bronson at the precise point where the carotid artery passes over the bone behind the right ear. Bruce applies 14 ounces of pressure. He holds it for 1/4 of a second. He releases. His hand returns to his side. His body has not shifted weight. His face has not changed expression. Second 6. Big Bull. Bronson's eyes lose focus. His extended right arm, the one that was reaching for Bruce's collar, drops to his side. His knees do not buckle. He does not fall. But his head tilts forward 2 inches and stops. His mouth opens. He makes a sound, a low, soft, almost questioning sound, like a man who has just been asked something he does not understand. His body, 480 pounds of muscle and bone that has spent 11 years crushing other men, simply stops responding to his instructions. He is conscious. He is upright. But he cannot, in this moment, take another step. The studio held its breath for 3 full seconds. The cameras did not move. Mike Douglas did not move. Carl Renzo, in his folding chair, did not move. Big Bull Bronson stood with his mouth slightly open, his eyes unfocused, his arm hanging dead at his side. Bruce Lee, 18 inches away, looked up at him with no expression at all. Then Bruce Lee said, into the silence, in a voice the microphone caught at full volume because the studio was now quieter than it had ever been since the building was constructed. A man who carries his strength on the outside has nothing on the inside to hold him up. He waited 1 second. He added, "Sit down, before you fall." And Big Bull Bronson, 480 pounds of undefeated heavyweight champion, the man who had crushed 312 professional wrestlers across 11 years and 41 states, who had put 41 men in the hospital and 1 in a grave, did exactly what the small Chinese man told him to do. He turned, slowly, his right hip dragging slightly the way it always dragged, and he took 3 small steps back to his chair, and he sat down. The chair groaned under his weight. He sat with his hands on his knees, his head bowed forward. He stared at the orange shag carpet between his feet for 11 full seconds. The cameras stayed on him. The audience did not breathe. Then, very slowly, Big Bull Bronson raised his head, looked at Bruce Lee, and did the second thing no one in the studio expected. He nodded. Once. A small, slow, deliberate nod. The nod of a man who has just been told something true that he did not want to hear. The audience erupted. Not all at once. It came in 3 waves. First, a single sound from the back of the studio. A small Asian man named Henry Liu, 52 years old, a retired Wing Chun teacher from Chinatown in Philadelphia, who had been brought to the show that day by his nephew. Henry Liu made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Then the woman who had grabbed her husband's wrist, Geraldine Foster from Camden, started clapping. 1 clap. 2. Slowly. Then the whole audience joined. Then they stood. Then they stomped. The old wooden floor of the Walnut Street studio, which had carried the weight of 480-pound Big Bull Bronson without complaint, shook now under 112 pairs of feet stomping in unison. It shook hard enough that the boom microphone overhead swung 4 inches to the right, and the audio engineer in the booth had to scramble to compensate. The applause lasted, according to the show's logs, 2 minutes and 41 seconds. The longest standing ovation in the Mike Douglas show's 11-year history. Bruce Lee did not bow. He did not raise his arms. He did not smile. He took a clean white handkerchief from his inside jacket pocket, the same pocket that held James DeMille's folded note, and he wiped the spit from his right cheek. He folded the handkerchief once. He returned it to his pocket. He looked at Big Bull Bronson, still sitting with his head bowed, and Bruce Lee did the most unexpected thing of the entire 6 seconds and all the seconds that followed. He walked over to Bronson's chair. He stood beside it. He placed one hand, lightly, on Bronson's massive shoulder. He said quietly, words the boom microphone caught and that the network preserved on the master tape that still exists in the Wilmington vault. "You are not your strength. You are what you do with it. Tonight you learned something. Tomorrow you can choose differently." Big Bull Bronson did not look up. But his right hand, the hand that had crushed a chair into a knot of metal and wood 12 minutes earlier, rose slowly and covered Bruce Lee's hand on his shoulder for 1 second. Then it dropped back to his knee. Bruce Lee walked back to his chair. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. He looked at Mike Douglas, who was still standing, mouth slightly open, and Bruce Lee tilted his head 1 degree to the right and waited. Mike Douglas, who had hosted 3,700 episodes of television, who had interviewed 3 sitting presidents, who had once been called the most unflappable man in American broadcasting, looked at Bruce, looked at the camera, looked at Big Bull Bronson, looked back at Bruce, and said the only thing his 19 years of training would let him say, "We'll be right back." What followed in the days and weeks after February the 9th, 1971, never made the official record. Big Bull Bronson did not appear at the Spectrum on March the 20th. The title defense was canceled. Carl Renzo issued a statement citing a back injury sustained in training. 3 months later, Bronson retired from professional wrestling. He was 34 years old. He returned to his hometown in West Virginia. He bought a small farm outside Beckley. He raised chickens. He did not give interviews. He did not appear at wrestling conventions. He did not, as far as any reporter ever discovered, wrestle another match for the rest of his life. In 1987, a wrestling historian named Roger Klein drove out to Beckley to find him. Klein found a quiet man in his 50s feeding chickens at sunset. Klein asked, gently, why he had retired. Bronson wiped his hands on his coveralls. "There was a man on a television show," he said. "He showed me something." Klein asked what. Bronson thought for a long moment. "He showed me," Bronson said, "that I had been wrong about what made me strong." Then he turned and walked back to the barn. Bruce Lee never spoke publicly about that night. He did not mention it in interviews. He did not write about it. He went home to his small house on Roscommary Road in Los Angeles. He returned to teaching. He returned to his family. He continued building the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do until his death 2 years later. But James DeMille, who had been there that morning with the folded note, asked Bruce later that week why he had done what he had done, why he had not simply walked off the set, why he had spoken to Bronson afterward, after the spit, after the silence. Bruce was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "A wall pushes back. Water does not push. Water finds the place where the wall is weakest, and it goes around. The man who pushes back at cruelty becomes cruel. The man who lets it pass becomes free. But the man who pours water on cruelty until it softens, that man changes something." The footage of that 6 seconds was rebroadcast only twice, once on the late news that same evening, once on an anniversary retrospective in 1981. The network claimed the master tape was lost in a fire in 1979. It was not. It sat in a metal vault in Wilmington, Delaware, where it sits today. The 31 million Americans who saw it live remembered it. They remembered the spit. They remembered the silence. They remembered the small man standing up. They remembered the giant sitting down. They remembered that a man who weighed 138 pounds had, in 6 seconds, ended an 11-year reign without raising his voice, without raising his fist, without raising anything except 2 fingers, briefly, to a point behind a man's ear. In a small farmhouse outside Beckley, West Virginia, on a shelf above the fireplace, until the day Big Bull Bronson died in 2003, sat a single framed photograph. A black and white still, pulled from the videotape. 2 men, one small, one very large. The small man's hand rested on the large man's shoulder. The large man's hand covered the small man's hand. Both men were looking down. There was no inscription. There did not need to be. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be witnessed. And on a Tuesday evening in February of 1971, in a green-walled studio on Walnut Street in Philadelphia, 31 million Americans witnessed what may be the only one that mattered, that the loudest man is not the strongest, that the largest body is not the most powerful, that a single hand, placed gently on the right place at the right moment, can do what an entire arena of fists could not. The mountain met the water. The water did not strike. The water did not shout. The water simply found the place where the mountain was already cracked, and the mountain, at last, sat down. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.
सफर में कोई गुस्सा नहीं हूँ, दूरी तुझसे कितनी तेरी तारीफों से रुकता नहीं। शाही लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमासा हूँ तुझ में मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या। प्यार बसे तू दिल की है पुकार मेरी। मेरे आंखों के सामने तू वैसे पी रही है, तेरी यादों के सफर में कोई गुस्सा नहीं हूँ, दूरी तुझसे कितनी तेरी तारीफों से रुकता नहीं। शाही लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमासा हूँ तुझ में मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या।
कि मुझे सामने पाँव में हम खड़े हैं देखा के राहों में, दिल को आके फिर से तू भी थाम ले, हम हाथों में तेरे ही नामों के अभी जाम ले, करने वालों में तेरे